The Great Hall of Cathara Prime was the most beautiful room in the known galaxy. Its walls were carved from living crystal that hummed with a soft blue light. Its ceiling stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed beneath it. For 10,000 years, the rulers of the Velithari Dominion had made their laws in this hall, and for 10,000 years, every other species in the galaxy had obeyed. Today, 3 humans stood in chains at its center. Admiral Yuki Tanaka kept her back straight. Her white dress uniform was torn at the shoulder, and dry blood ran down the left side of her face, but she did not look down. She stared directly at the throne where Sovereign Zythar sat, watching her with his cold golden eyes. Beside her, General Dmitry Volkov breathed slowly through his broken nose. He was a big man, with hands like shovels, and a laugh that could fill any room. He was not laughing now. His jaw was tight, and his eyes moved across the hall, counting the guards, calculating odds out of habit, even though he knew there was no way out. Fleet Marshal Amara Ose stood on Tanaka's other side. She was the oldest of the 3, with gray streaks in her dark hair and calm, steady eyes. She had written poetry about the stars her entire life. She looked up at the crystal ceiling now, and thought it was a shame that something so beautiful belonged to something so cruel. Sovereign Zythar rose from his throne. He was tall, even for a Velithari. His scaled skin was the color of dark emeralds, and his voice carried through the hall without effort, deep and smooth like a river of ice. "The Galactic Confederacy has spoken," he said. "These 3 humans are guilty of acts of terror against the people of Cathara Prime. The bombing at the Treaty Summit killed 47 Velithari citizens. The punishment is death." Every person in that hall knew it was a lie. The bombing had been Zythar's own work, planned in secret by his intelligence officers and carried out by his own agents. The human commanders had come to Cathara Prime in good faith, seeking peace, and Zythar had used that trust to destroy them. But truth did not matter in the Dominion. Power mattered, and the Velithari had all of it. The broadcast went out live to every system in the Confederacy. 4,000 worlds watched as the 3 commanders were forced to their knees. Billions of eyes, human and alien alike, saw the neural disintegration devices placed against their skulls. Tanaka spoke last. Her voice was quiet, but clear enough for the microphones to catch. She looked directly into the broadcast lens and said, "Remember us." Then the devices fired, and the 3 greatest military minds humanity had ever produced were gone. On Earth, the silence that followed was unlike anything the planet had ever known. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of something enormous waking up. In the command center of the United Terran Council, deep beneath the city of Geneva, 200 of humanity's leaders sat in that silence for a long time. Some wept. Some stared at nothing. Some gripped the edges of their desks so hard, their knuckles turned white. The Velithari ultimatum arrived within the hour. Surrender all border colonies. Pull back to the Sol system. Accept permanent lesser species status. Comply within 30 cycles or face total war. Council President Elena Vasquez read the ultimatum aloud. When she finished, nobody spoke. The weight of it sat on every chest in the room, like a stone. Then a voice came from the back. It belonged to a young intelligence officer named Sergei Petrov. He was nobody important, a junior analyst who had spent his career buried in classified files most people would never see. He stood up and his voice shook, but his words were steady. "We need to wake up Baba Yaga." The room went still in a different way. Several of the older officers turned to look at him with wide eyes. A few of the younger ones looked confused. "That program was shut down," said Admiral Chen, the head of naval operations. "She was put away for a reason." "The reason," Petrov said, "is standing on the steps of Cathara Prime right now, celebrating the murder of our people." President Vasquez raised her hand for silence. She looked around the room, at the faces of the men and women who led humanity. She saw grief. She saw rage. She saw fear. And behind all of it, she saw a cold, hard willingness to do whatever it took. "Put it to a vote," she said. 12,000 light-years away, on a Valithari intelligence ship orbiting the Ashvale corridor, a senior analyst named Officer Kethan was doing his job. His job was to know things, specifically to know everything about humanity that might be useful to the Dominion. He had pulled up every military file the Dominion had on human commanders. Most of them were routine. Training records, battle histories, psychological profiles. Humanity was young and aggressive, but nothing the Dominion could not handle. They had crushed species far older and far stronger. But then he found something strange. A file buried so deep in the human intelligence archives that it had taken his best decryption algorithms 3 days to crack. Most of it was redacted. Entire pages were blacked out. Names, dates, locations, all gone. The file was almost empty. Almost. At the very top, in bold red text, was a code name, Baba Yaga. Below it, a single line of text remained visible. It was not a mission report. It was not a tactical assessment. It was a warning, written by humans to other humans. Do not engage. Do not provoke. Do not pursue. Kethan stared at it for a moment. Then he laughed softly, shook his head, and closed the file. Humans and their superstitions. They were a dramatic species. Whatever this Baba Yaga was, it was probably some failed experiment, or a retired officer with an inflated reputation. He filed it under low priority and moved on. He would not laugh again for a very long time. Back on Earth, the vote passed 7-5. The dissenters argued their case with passion. One of them, an old general named Okoro, stood and spoke plainly. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said. "She won't just fight the Dominion. She will burn the entire galactic order to the ground." President Vasquez looked at him with eyes that had aged 10 years in a single day. "Good," she said. Deep beneath the Ural Mountains, in a facility that appeared on no map and existed in no official record, a light turned on in a room that had been dark for 30 years. Machines hummed to life. Ice began to melt. A heartbeat, slow and steady, began to grow stronger. Baba Yaga was waking up, and the galaxy was not ready. The facility was called HFY 7. The name was an old joke, the kind only Russians would make. In the old fairy tales, Baba Yaga lived in a hut that stood on chicken legs, deep in a dark forest. Izba was the Russian word for hut, and this hut was buried 2 kilometers beneath the Ural Mountains, behind 16 blast doors, a network of electromagnetic kill switches, and enough explosives to collapse the entire mountain on top of it if something went wrong. It was not a prison. It was a precaution. Dr. Alexei Sorokin had worked in HFY 7 for 11 years, and in all that time, he had never once seen the woman in the cryochamber open her eyes. He had monitored her vitals, checked her neural readings, and made sure the systems that kept her frozen continued to work perfectly. He had read her file so many times he could recite it from memory, though most of it was classified well above his clearance level. What he did know was enough to keep him awake some nights. Her name was Katya Morozova. Commander Katya Morozova, if you used her rank, though she had held the rank for less than 2 years before they put her to sleep. She had been 34 years old when she went into the ice. She would still be 34 when she came out. 30 years ago, when humanity had barely stepped beyond its own solar system, the Kreth Hive had come. They were an insectoid species, billion strong, that consumed worlds the way fire consumed paper. They hit the colony at Proxima Centauri with 40,000 warriors, and the only thing standing between them and the complete destruction of every human being on that world was a garrison of 200 soldiers led by a young officer nobody had heard of. Katya Morozova held Proxima for 17 days. She did not hold it the way a normal commander would, by building walls and waiting for help. She held it by getting inside the enemy's head. She learned how the Kreth communicated, through chemical signals and vibrations, and she turned it against them. She set traps that drove entire swarms into killing each other. She rigged the colony's underground tunnels with sonic weapons that mimicked Kreth distress calls, pulling thousands of warriors into dead ends where they starved in the dark. She fought without sleep, without mercy, and without a single wasted movement. By the time reinforcements arrived, the Kreth were not just defeated. An entire species that had never known fear in its existence had learned what it felt like, and the lesson had come from one woman. The Kreth hive never attacked human space again, not because they could not, because they chose not to. The elders of the hive issued a single decree about the species called humanity. The translation was rough, but the meaning was clear. There is a darkness among them. Do not wake it. After the war, the Terran Council had a problem. Katya Morozova was a hero, but she was also something else. The psychologists who evaluated her used words like hyper-adaptive and tactically uninhibited. What they meant, in simpler language, was that she had no limit. Most soldiers, even the best ones, had a line they would not cross, a point where they would hesitate. Katya did not hesitate. She simply found the most effective path to victory and walked it, no matter where it led. In peacetime, it made her dangerous. So they made a deal with her. She agreed to cryosleep. She understood the logic. A weapon like her needed a war, and without one, she might become the very thing she had fought against. She walked into the chamber on her own 2 feet, looked Dr. Sorokin's predecessor in the eye, and said, "Wake me when they need me." Now they needed her. Sorokin's hands trembled as he began the revival sequence. The chamber hissed as the temperature began to climb. The ice on the glass window melted in thin streams, and slowly, like watching a photograph develop, the face beneath became visible. She was not what people expected. She was not tall or physically imposing. She had a lean face with high cheekbones and short dark hair. Her eyes, when they finally opened, were a pale gray that seemed to take in everything at once and give nothing back. She did not gasp or panic or ask where she was. She sat up, looked at Sorokin, and said one word. "When?" "It has been 30 years, Commander," Sorokin said. She processed this in silence. Then she stood, her legs steady, despite 3 decades of frozen sleep, and said, "Take me to whoever is in charge." They flew her to Geneva that same night. President Vasquez met her in a secure briefing room with the full Terran Council. Katya sat at the end of a long table and listened without expression as they told her everything. The treaty summit, the false flag bombing, the executions. When they played the footage, the room watched her face. She did not flinch. She did not cry. She watched Yuki Tanaka speak her last words. She watched Dmitry Volkov, the man who had been her closest friend for 15 years, forced to his knees. She watched Amara Osei look up at the ceiling as if searching for one last beautiful thing before the end. The room was silent. Katya's expression had not changed, but something in the air around her had. It was hard to describe. The temperature in the room had not actually dropped, but every person present would later swear that it had. It was as if the space around her had become heavier, darker, more still, like sitting next to a black hole that had just begun to pull. "How many ships do I get?" she asked. Admiral Chen cleared his throat. "We can assemble a task force. Fast attack frigates, stealth corvettes, electronic warfare cruisers. Not a large fleet, but the best we have." "I don't need large," Katya said. I need smart. She spent the next 72 hours without sleep, reviewing every piece of intelligence humanity had on the Velithari Dominion. Their fleet movements, their communication protocols, their military doctrine, their culture, their psychology, their fears. She picked her officers personally. She chose people the regular military considered problems. Officers who thought sideways. Engineers who had been disciplined for unauthorized modifications. Intelligence agents who asked uncomfortable questions. Pilots who flew like they had a personal grudge against the laws of physics. When the task force was assembled, she addressed them once. She stood in front of 400 men and women on the deck of the carrier Nightfall and spoke in a flat, quiet voice. The Dominion thinks we are afraid, she said. Good. Let them think that. Fear is a weapon, and right now they have handed it to us. They expect us to come screaming out of the dark, with guns blazing. We will not do that. We will come quietly, we will come slowly. And by the time they understand what is happening, it will already be over. She paused and looked across the faces before her. They killed 3 of the finest people I have ever known. They did it on camera, and they smiled. So here is what we are going to do. We are going to make them wish they hadn't. Not with rage, not with revenge, with precision, with patience, with the kind of fear that does not go away when you turn the lights on. She turned to leave, then stopped. One more order. Cut all communications with the Confederacy. Every channel, every frequency, total silence. Admiral Chen, watching from the bridge, frowned. If we go silent, the Dominion will think we're scared. Katya looked at him with those pale gray eyes. That is exactly what I want them to think. The last transmission Earth sent to the Galactic Network was a single automated message. The United Terran Council has no further comment at this time. Then, the line went dead, and the silence began. Sovereign Zithar did not like silence. He sat on his throne on Cathara Prime and stared at the communication feeds from human space. Nothing. Not a single transmission in 14 cycles. No pleas for mercy. No angry threats. No diplomatic backchannels trying to negotiate a better deal. Just a dead, empty quiet where a species used to be. His advisors told him this was a good sign. The humans were afraid, they said. The executions had worked. They were probably fighting among themselves, deciding which colonies to surrender first. Give them time, and they would come crawling back with their heads down. Zithar wanted to believe this. But somewhere deep in his ancient brain, in the part that had kept his species alive for 10,000 years, a small voice whispered that silence was not the same as surrender. He ignored it and gave the order. The Third Dominion Armada, 1,200 warships under the command of Warlord Scython, would move into the Ashvale Corridor and begin occupying human border colonies. If the humans would not leave willingly, they would be removed. Warlord Scython was one of the finest military commanders the Dominion had ever produced. He had fought in 37 campaigns across 9 centuries. He was methodical, patient, and ruthless. He had crushed rebellions, burned pirate fleets, and brought entire species to heel. He was not the kind of officer who frightened easily. But when the Third Armada arrived at the human colony of New Volgograd and found it completely empty, something cold settled in his stomach. The colony was not destroyed. It was not damaged. It was simply abandoned, as if every single person had stood up from whatever they were doing and walked away. Food sat on tables, half-eaten. Screens still displayed the news broadcasts from the day the executions aired. Children's toys lay in the streets. It was a ghost town, perfectly preserved, perfectly wrong. Scython sent teams to search every building. They found nothing. No traps, no weapons, no hidden soldiers. Just the eerie stillness of a place where life had been and was no longer. Then they found the message. It was carved into the stone floor of the colony's central plaza, written in perfect Vilathari script, each letter deep and precise, as if someone had taken great care with it. The message read, "You killed my children. Now I am coming for yours." Below the words was a drawing, a simple, crude picture of a small hut standing on two legs. Scython stared at it for a long time. He did not know what it meant. None of his officers did. They ran it through every cultural database the Dominion possessed, and found nothing. It was a human symbol, old and strange, and it meant nothing to them. It would mean everything soon enough. The disappearances started 3 days later. A scout ship on the edge of the formation stopped responding to communications. When a patrol was sent to investigate, they found the ship drifting in open space, completely intact. Its engines were cold. Its weapons were unfired. Its crew of 12 was alive, sitting in their seats, staring at nothing. They were breathing but would not speak. Medical scans showed no injuries, no toxins, no signs of physical harm. Their minds were simply somewhere else, locked behind eyes that had seen something they could not process. The doctors called it acute psychological shutdown. The soldiers called it something else. They called it the stare. 4 more ships went dark within the next cycle. Same pattern. No damage, no battle, crews alive but empty. 1 ship was found with every internal light removed. The crew had been sitting in total darkness for an estimated 6 hours before they were recovered. The only sound on the ship was a recording playing on a loop through the internal speakers. It was a woman's voice, calm and low, speaking in a human language none of the Vilathari could understand. When they finally translated it, the words were simple. "I can see you. Can you see me?" Scython ordered the fleet into a defensive formation. He doubled the patrols, tripled the sensor sweeps, and kept every ship at combat readiness around the clock. His crews were alert, disciplined, and heavily armed. They were the elite of the Dominion's navy. They would not be frightened by tricks. But tricks were only the beginning. A supply convoy of 8 ships was attacked on the 6th day. Attacked was perhaps the wrong word. No weapons were fired. The convoy simply stopped. Every navigation system on every ship locked up at the same moment, and the fleet's course was changed by exactly 1 degree. Such a small adjustment that nobody noticed for hours. By the time they did, the convoy had drifted into an uncharted asteroid field. 2 ships were destroyed by collisions before the rest could stop. The surviving crews swore that their systems had been functioning perfectly the entire time. On the 9th day, the dreadnought Valor's Fist, the largest ship in the 3rd Armada, lost control of its own bridge. Every door sealed, every console locked. The crew of 300 stood helpless as their own ship's artificial intelligence was rewritten in front of their eyes. The main view screen flickered, and a face appeared. A human woman, with short dark hair and pale gray eyes. She looked at the bridge crew with an expression that was not angry, not cruel, not triumphant. It was the look of someone who had all the time in the world. She said nothing. The screen went black, and then every speaker on the ship, all 8,000 of them, began to play a song. It was a lullaby, soft and sweet, sung in Russian by a woman's voice. It played for 6 hours straight, before Scython's engineers managed to regain control of the ship. By then, the entire crew was shaking. The song was broadcast on every Dominion military frequency in the sector. Every ship heard it. Every soldier heard it. And every one of them understood, on some deep level that had nothing to do with logic, that they were being hunted by something that was enjoying itself. Scython was not a coward. He had faced death more times than he could count, but he was also not a fool. He knew the difference between a battle and a slaughter, and he knew which one this was becoming. He sent a priority message to Sovereign Zythar. He chose his words carefully, because Velathari officers did not admit weakness, but the meaning was clear. The enemy commander is operating beyond any tactical framework in our records. Human forces are using methods we have not encountered and cannot currently counter. Their attacks are designed not to destroy, but to destabilize. Crew morale is deteriorating rapidly. I am requesting immediate reinforcement and a strategic review of our current engagement protocols. This is not a commander we are facing. This is a force of nature. Zythar read the message on his throne and felt a spike of rage so hot it nearly cracked his composure. Scythian, his finest warlord, was asking for help against a species that had only been in space for 400 years. Against a species he had personally humiliated on galactic broadcast. Against animals. He sent his reply in 3 words. Hold your position. He did not send reinforcements. Far away, in the darkness between stars, Katya Morozova sat in the command center of the carrier Nightfall and studied a holographic map of the Ashvale corridor. Blue dots represented Dominion ships. There were fewer of them every day. Her first officer, Captain Reza Ahmadi, stood beside her. He was one of the sideways thinkers she had chosen, a man who had once been court-martialed for reprogramming a fleet's entire communication array as a practical joke. Now that skill was being put to better use. The Third Armada is pulling into a tighter formation, he said. They are scared. They should be, Katya said, but they are not scared enough. Not yet. When will they be scared enough? Katya did not answer immediately. She was looking at the map, but her eyes were focused on something beyond it. Something far away. The throne room, the place where 3 people she loved had died on their knees. They will be scared enough, she said quietly, when every light in the Dominion flickers, and they all wonder if it was me. She touched a point on the map, deep inside Velathari space, far behind enemy lines. The corridor is a distraction, she said. It always was. While they watch us here, this is where we are going. Ahmadi looked at the point she was indicating and felt his blood go cold. Cathara Prime, the Sovereign's homeworld, the heart of the Dominion itself. That is insane, he said. Katya looked at him with those pale gray eyes, and for the first time since she had woken from the ice, something that might have been a smile crossed her face. Yes, she said. It is. Nobody saw them coming. That was the part the Velathari could never explain afterward. The part that burned worse than the defeat itself. Their sensor networks covered 1,000 light-years in every direction. Their early warning systems were the most advanced in the galaxy. They had been watching human space for weeks, waiting for a fleet to come roaring out of the dark. But Katya Morozova did not roar. She whispered. The Ghost Fleet had been moving for 21 days. 12 ships, small and fast, running on minimal power with their engines barely above idle. They did not travel in a straight line. They slipped through the gaps in the Dominion's sensor net, the way water slips through cracks in stone. Using the gravitational shadows of dead stars, the electromagnetic noise of nebulae, and the blind spots that Katya had spent weeks mapping from captured Dominion data. They moved so quietly that a Velathari patrol ship passed within 4,000 kilometers of the carrier Nightfall and detected nothing. Its sensors showed empty space. Its crew saw nothing on their screens. They flew on, never knowing that death had just passed them in the dark. The key to the entire operation was the Trojan. 3 months before the executions, before anyone on Earth knew what Zythar was planning, a Terran intelligence agent had planted a piece of code in a routine software update for Velathari communication satellites. It sat in the system like a seed in frozen ground, waiting. When Katya activated it, the seed grew. It spread through the Dominion's communication network in hours, not destroying anything, not disrupting anything, just watching. It mapped every frequency, every protocol, every access code. It learned the patterns of the orbital defense grid around Cathara Prime, the way a hunter learns the habits of its prey. And when the time came, it opened a door. The Ghost Fleet entered the Cathara system through the planet's own defense network. The satellites saw them and classified them as friendly. The orbital platforms tracked them and did nothing. The ground-based early warning systems registered 12 new contacts and filed them as routine patrol traffic. By the time anyone realized what had happened, Katya's ships were already inside the kill zone. The operation began at 0300 local time, when the capital city of Cathara Prime was at its quietest. The first thing to go was the planetary shield. The Trojans shut it down in 6 seconds, sending a cascade of false diagnostic reports that told the shield operators everything was fine. By the time they realized the reports were fake, the shield had been down for 4 minutes. And 4 minutes was all Katya needed. The orbital defense grid went next. 12 platforms, each armed with enough firepower to destroy a battleship, went dark in a synchronized shutdown that was so clean and so precise that the Dominion's own engineers would later call it beautiful. It was the most elegant act of sabotage in military history, and it happened without a single shot being fired. Then the dropships fell. 40 operators. That was all she brought to the surface. 40 men and women from the Cossack Division, the most elite special forces unit humanity had ever assembled. Each one of them had been chosen by Katya personally. Each one of them had trained for this specific mission for weeks. They hit the ground in the gardens outside the Sovereign's Palace, a vast complex of crystal towers and ancient stone that had been the seat of Velathari power for 8,000 years. The palace guard was 2,000 strong, warriors bred for combat, encased in powered armor that could shrug off standard weapons fire. It did not matter. Katya did not fight the way the Velathari expected. She did not charge the front gates or try to blast through the walls. She had spent those sleepless weeks studying not just the palace's defenses, but its architecture, its history, its ventilation systems, its power grid, and most importantly, the psychology of the soldiers who guarded it. The Velathari were proud warriors. They fought face to face, strength against strength. It was their culture, their identity. They stood their ground and met the enemy head-on. From below, from behind, from angles that should not have existed. Her operators moved through the palace like smoke. They used the maintenance tunnels that the guards considered beneath their attention. They cut power to sections of the palace one at a time, forcing the guards to spread out and investigate. They set off false alarms in the east wing while they moved through the west. They turned the palace's own security systems against its defenders, locking doors, venting atmosphere from corridors, filling hallways with blinding light and deafening sound. The guards were brave. They fought hard, and they fought well. But they were fighting an enemy they could not see, could not predict, and could not understand. Every time they formed a defensive line, it was flanked. Every time they set a trap, it was turned around. Every time they thought they had cornered one of the human operators, the lights would go out, and the world would change. When it was over, the Cossack division had taken the palace with 0 casualties. 0. 40 humans against 2,000 of the Dominion's finest, and not a single human fell. Katya walked through the shattered doors of the throne room as the first light of dawn came through the crystal walls. The room that had watched the execution of her 3 commanders was silent now, except for the crunch of broken glass under her boots. Sovereign Zithar stood at the foot of his own throne. He had not run. She would give him that much. He stood tall, his golden eyes blazing, his ceremonial blade drawn. He was ancient and powerful, and even now, even in this moment, He held himself like a king. Around him lay the bodies of his personal guard, the last 12 warriors who had stood between him and the door. They had fought to the death. Katya had not wanted to kill them, but they had given her no choice. She stopped 10 paces from him. Her breathing was even. She held no weapon in her hands. "You are animals," Zithar said. His voice was steady, but she could see the muscles in his jaw working, the slight tremor in his clawed hands. "You are a young, brutal, stupid species, and you will never hold this world. My people will rise, and they will burn your kind from the stars." Katya looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached up and tapped a small device on her collar. A red light blinked on. "The galaxy is watching, Sovereign," she said. His eyes went wide. He looked up and saw it. The broadcast drones. Tiny machines no bigger than insects, hovering in every corner of the throne room. They had been there since before her team entered the palace, placed by the Trojan, activated the moment she walked through the door. Every screen in the Confederacy showed the same image. The great sovereign Zithar, ruler of 4,000 worlds, conqueror of 100 species, standing in his own throne room, while a human woman looked at him with quiet, terrifying patience. Katya's team moved forward. 2 operators disarmed Zithar with efficient, careful movements. He did not resist. His body seemed to understand what his mind refused to accept. They brought him to his knees, the same position he had forced on Tanaka, Volkov, and Osei. The symbolism was impossible to miss. Katya stepped closer. She leaned down until her face was level with his. "I could kill you," she said, her voice low enough that only the nearest drones could pick it up. "I could do to you exactly what you did to them. Every species in the galaxy would call it justice. Some of my own people would call it mercy." She paused. The silence was so complete that the hum of the broadcast drones sounded like thunder. "But I am not you. I did not come here to take your life. I came here to take your power. And I just did." She stood and turned to the broadcast lens. She spoke clearly, in simple galactic standard that every species could understand. "My name is Katya Morozova. 30 cycles ago, the Velathari Dominion murdered 3 human commanders on this very floor. They called us a lesser species. They told the galaxy that we were animals to be controlled." She gestured to the room around her, the shattered guards, the kneeling sovereign, the broken throne. "Look at your rulers now," she said, "and decide for yourselves what lesser means." Then she split the broadcast screen. On one side, the live image of Zithar on his knees. On the other, the recording of Tanaka, Volkov, and Osei in their final moments. The 2 images played side by side, and 4,000 worlds watched in stunned silence. Katya walked out of the throne room, down the long crystal corridor, and into the morning light of Cathara Prime. She did not look back. She had not come to conquer. She had come to send a message. The message had been received. The broadcast broke the galaxy open like a hammer through thin ice. For 10,000 years, the Velathari Dominion had held power through one simple idea. They could not be defeated. They were the oldest, the strongest, the most advanced. Other species might grow and build and dream, but in the end, the Dominion decided what was allowed and what was not. It was the way of things. It had always been the way of things. And then a woman with 40 soldiers walked into the sovereign's throne room and put him on his knees, and every species in the galaxy saw it happen in real time. The first rebellion started within hours. The Chelhari Collective, an insectoid species that had been under Dominion rule for 3,000 years, shut down every Velathari administrative building on their homeworld and declared independence. Their queen addressed her people from the steps of the capital and said, "If the humans can stand, so can we." The Tarani Confederacy followed the next day. then the Mahil, then the Orathi, then a dozen more, and then a dozen after that. Species that had not dared to raise their voices in generations suddenly remembered that they had voices at all. The galaxy was waking up, and it was angry. The Dominion tried to respond. Warlord Sci-Fan, still stranded in the Ashvale corridor, with what remained of the Third Armada, received orders to return and suppress the uprisings. He looked at the orders for a long time. He thought about the empty colony on New Volgograd, the message carved in stone, the lullaby that still played in his nightmares. He thought about the woman with the pale gray eyes, who had taken the most heavily defended palace in the galaxy with 40 people. Then he did something no Velithari warlord had done in living memory. He refused the order. "I will not spend what remains of my fleet fighting wars that our sovereign's arrogance created," he transmitted back. "The humans were right. We were wrong. I recommend immediate negotiation." He was stripped of his rank within the hour. But by then, it did not matter. Half the fleet's captains had already signaled their agreement with him. The Dominion's military, the iron fist that had held the galaxy in place for millennia, was cracking from the inside. The neutral powers of the Confederacy, the species that had stayed out of Dominion politics and kept their heads down, saw their opportunity. The Galactic Accord, a body that had existed for centuries as little more than a rubber stamp for Velithari decisions, called an emergency session on the station of Meridian Deep. Every species was expected to attend. For the first time, the Velithari would not be chairing the meeting. The Terran delegation arrived aboard the carrier Nightfall, which docked at Meridian Deep and drew stares from every species on the station. The ship looked like it had been through hell. Its hull was scarred, its paint was stripped, and half its antenna array was held together with emergency welds. But it was there, solid and real, and the crew that walked off it moved with the quiet confidence of people who knew exactly what they were capable of. The lead diplomat was Ambassador Priya Sharma, a calm woman with steady hands and a mind like a razor. She had been chosen specifically because she was not military. Katia had insisted on that. "We showed them the fist," Katia had said. "Now show them the open hand." The session lasted 11 days. It was difficult, painful, and often ugly. The Velithari delegation, stripped of their usual power, fought every point with the desperate energy of people watching their world crumble. The other species had their own grievances, their own demands, their own centuries of suppressed anger. Several times, the talks nearly collapsed entirely. But they held. They held because every species in that room, even the Velithari, understood that the alternative was worse. The old order was dead. If they did not build a new one, the galaxy would tear itself apart. The final treaty was called the Morozova Accords, a name that Katia hated. She had refused to attend the negotiations and threatened to put anyone who named anything after her into an airlock. They did it anyway. Some gestures were too important for one person's discomfort to stop them. The Accords stripped the Velithari of unilateral authority over the Confederacy. A new council was formed, with representatives from every member species, each with an equal voice. The Dominion's military would be reduced and placed under joint oversight. The practice of classifying species as lesser or greater was formally abolished, and humanity was offered a permanent seat on the High Council. Ambassador Sharma accepted the seat with a short speech that was broadcast across the galaxy. She spoke about the 3 commanders who had died on Kethera Prime, about the cost of arrogance and the price of silence. She spoke about the future, a future where strength was not used to dominate, but to protect. She did not mention Baba Yaga by name. She did not need to. After the ceremony, an old ambassador from the Chelhari collective approached Sharma in the corridor outside the council chamber. He was ancient, even by Chelhari standards, his exoskeleton cracked and faded with age. He moved slowly, but his compound eyes were bright, with a sharp, careful intelligence. "Ambassador Sharma," he said, his translator rendering his clicking speech into smooth galactic standard. "I must ask you something that has been troubling my people since the broadcast." "Of course," Sharma said. "The one you call Baba Yaga," he said. "Is she truly just one woman?" Sharma looked at the old Chelhari for a long moment. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that was warm on the surface, but had something harder underneath. "She is one woman," Sharma said, "but she is not unique. She is what happens when you push humanity too far. We are a species that builds and laughs and loves and writes poetry about the stars. But when someone takes those things from us, when someone hurts the people we care about and thinks we will simply accept it, something changes. Something old and deep and patient wakes up inside us." She paused. "We all have a little Baba Yaga in us, Ambassador. Every single one of us. Katya Morozova is simply the one who answered the call this time." The old Chelhari considered this in silence for a long time. Then he bowed his head, a gesture of deep respect among his people, and walked away. 3 weeks after the accords were signed, a memorial was built on Cathara Prime. It stood in the central plaza of the capital, not far from the sovereign's palace. It was a simple structure, 3 pillars of white stone rising from a base of dark granite. Each pillar bore a name: Tanaka, Volkov, Osei. The dedication ceremony was attended by representatives of over 100 species. Speeches were made, songs were sung. It was a moment of healing for a galaxy that had a great deal of healing left to do. When the crowds had gone and the plaza was empty, a single figure walked across the stone and stood before the memorial. Katya Morozova was wearing civilian clothes for the first time in as long as she could remember. A plain jacket, dark trousers, boots that had seen better days. Without her uniform, she looked smaller, younger, more human. She stood in silence for a long time, looking at the 3 names carved in stone. Then she reached into her jacket and pulled out 3 objects. She placed them at the base of the memorial, one by one. A small metal flask filled with vodka, because Dmitry Volkov had never gone anywhere without one, and always insisted that any problem could be solved with a drink and a good argument. A paper crane, folded with precise, careful hands, because Yuki Tanaka had folded them whenever she was thinking, and her quarters on every ship she had ever served on had been filled with hundreds of them. And a slim book of poetry, its cover worn soft by decades of handling, because Amara Osei had believed that the universe was a poem, and humanity's job was to find the words. Katya touched each item gently. She did not cry. She did not speak. But anyone watching would have seen something shift behind those pale gray eyes, a softness that very few people in the galaxy had ever been allowed to see. She straightened up and took a breath. The morning air of Cathara Prime was cool and smelled faintly of rain. Crystal towers rose around her, catching the light and scattering it in all directions. It was a beautiful world. It did not deserve to be ruled by fear. None of them did. She turned and walked away from the memorial, toward the street, toward the crowd, toward the ordinary flow of a galaxy that was trying to learn how to be something new. A young Velithari child stood near the edge of the plaza, holding his mother's hand. He had watched the woman place the objects at the memorial, and he was curious in the way that only children can be, openly and without caution. "Who is that?" he asked, looking up at his mother. His mother was quiet for a moment. She looked at the human woman walking away, this small, unremarkable figure disappearing into the crowd, and she felt something she had never felt before when looking at a human. It was not hatred. It was not anger. It was not even fear, exactly. It was respect, deep and real, and mixed with a careful understanding that some things in the universe should never be tested. She pulled her child a little closer and said softly, "That is why we do not harm humans." The child watched the woman vanish into the crowd, and said nothing. He would remember this moment for the rest of his life, though he would never fully understand why. Katya Morozova disappeared into the streets of Cathara Prime that morning. No cameras tracked her, no officers followed her. She walked among aliens who had once called her species lesser, and none of them knew who she was. The galaxy moved on, treaties were honored, councils met, new alliances formed, old wounds began, slowly, to close. It was not a perfect peace. It was messy and fragile, and full of arguments that sometimes lasted years. But it was real, and it was built not on the power of one species over another, but on the understanding that every species, no matter how small or young or strange, had something inside it that deserved to be respected. And if they ever forgot that lesson, somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, a woman with pale gray eyes would be waiting. Katya disappeared into the crowd, and the galaxy remembered.